Welcome to the Voice of Insurance. I'm Mark Gagan. As a journalist, one of the best things about my job is being allowed into the far-flung and most fascinating corners of our industry to find out how things work. Protection and indemnity, P&I, is exactly one of those places. And it would be easy to ignore were it not the source of so many of the biggest insurance stories of the past decade. For example, a mega claim like the Costa Concordia was a P&I event that captured the attention of the whole world over many months. But most of us know almost nothing about this ultra-specialist part of the insurance world and the 13 global marine liability mutuals that inhabit it. In fact, we're actually more ignorant because of most of what we think we know about P&I is probably wrong. So that's why I decided to record this episode with Dorothea Ioannou, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of the American Club. If you don't know Dorothea, she's extremely well regarded and a strong character, and I had a great time talking with her. As well as myth-busting much of what the non-marine world thinks it knows about P&I, we discuss the ongoing impact of COVID-19 and other major trends affecting the marine sector and the wider insurance world. As we were both in lockdown, we spoke on a web call between London and Athens, and so occasionally we get the inevitable bit of interference on the line. But I'm pretty happy with the end result. So, enjoy the podcast. Before we get started, just a quick reminder that advertising slots are available here and in other places in the Voice of Insurance podcasts. Podcasting is the fastest growing medium and attracts a high quality audience of key decision makers. It's also an intimate medium where you, the listener, are right in the room with me and the interview subjects. Needless to say, that means it's a great way of getting your message out directly to an audience because you know you've got their full attention. It's also very cost effective. So get in touch with Mark at thevoiceofinsurance.com to find out how you could be speaking directly to the industry. Dorothea, what are the specific challenges that P&I clubs are facing with the COVID-19 crisis?
The challenges that we're facing are, I would say, the same types of challenges that we have faced in the past related to infectious diseases and outbreaks on ships. Obviously, this is probably the largest, at least in my experience, in my history, in my career. The basic things that we have to deal with, obviously, are outbreaks on the ship and how we manage that, because then we have not just the normal usual illness that has one person getting sick and a regular repatriation, but because now the level of a pandemic, that means that you're not only having to deal with managing multiple cases on a ship, but you also have to deal with now restrictions within ports, restrictions for travel, inability sometimes to even disembark, unfortunately, crew members that have passed because of fears in ports. We had a case like that, and it took us quite some time. And in fact, in the end, the authorities did not allow the body to be repatriated, and it had to be done in a foreign country. So, in terms of the management of the body, so these are really sad things that we're dealing with. I've never had to deal with things like that. I think a larger challenge also is related to the fact that, some clubs may be over exposed because they may have a larger sector, let's say, of cruise ships within their membership, so that complicates things.
Is that because cruise ships have got such large crews?
They have such large crews, and so it's a combination, right? You have the large level of crews, but you also have passenger liability then implicated. So it's not as simple as, let's say, a tanker or a bulker, where you're just dealing, average size of crews of 25 people, let's say, on a ship, depending on the size, okay? But you're dealing sometimes with thousands, and then that then leads into other aspects of management of this crisis, and that is some cruise line operators are making commercial decisions not to proceed with cruises, and that, though not directly impacting on P&I cover because it's a commercial decision, the P&I clubs, because we're owners mutuals, we are there to help in every single situation. So we're doing our best through our network of correspondence to assist them in managing these things. And sometimes that includes cutting short cruises and, helping and facilitating repatriation of passengers and crew.
Given that you've had this long-standing relationship between the shipping industry and communicable diseases and quarantine, I suppose it's been as long as ships have been sailing,
Yeah.
since sort of the commerce of the 15th century, 16th century, that there's always been this problem of going to foreign climes and picking up diseases and then potentially spreading them around the world and being quarantined. Do you think the P&I industry is actually better prepared than most of us for this kind of challenge?
Well, I think definitely from an insurance perspective, yes, I think that we are. I mean, if you look on most clubs' websites, if you look at our website, there's a whole section that's dedicated to infectious diseases. So, we've had to deal with malaria. We had to deal with Ebola in 2014. A lot of the same issues that we had to deal with in 2014, we're dealing with now. So a lot of the information that we're circulating comes out of already existing research that we've done and already existing experience that we've had. So yes, we've had to deal with this type of liability or this type of crisis. But like I said, I think it's a matter of scale. I can't remember in my years to have something like this, of this scale. I can't remember having an infectious disease crisis which impacted on restrictions of travel on a global level. I think that's the difference now. But I do believe, yes, that we were in an advantageous position to be ready to deal with it.
So, your principal problem is things like repatriation that you simply can't do at the moment because there
Yes.
are no flights.
Yes. Because there's no flights, and also because authorities within the ports are not allowing disembarkation in many cases, and also we have a case of a cruise ship that has decided is going to be laid up. They've decided not to do the season, but they had started to prepare, so they had 52 crew on board, and the authorities will not allow them to disembark, and there's complications related to actually getting flights. But I think in the end of the day, you probably can manage to find flights, even if it's in a roundabout way. The biggest problem is that the authorities, number one, they're imposing quarantines sometimes on crews, and then they're simply not allowing them to disembark. So that's also a challenge. Yeah.
So generally, you've got ships that are just anchored just offshore. That then
Yeah.
you need to be sort of sending supplies out to them and medical
Yeah.
supplies and food.
Yeah.
And then you're
Yeah.
helping to cover those increased costs of
Well,
working
no.
there.
Well, see, this is the thing. This is the cover issue is a different matter. So no matter what, whether something's covered or not covered, the P&I clubs are there to help and facilitate and provide assistance through their network of correspondence. But unless there's an actual outbreak on a ship, the cover's not triggered based on the express rules, right? Because we are always restricted within the rules. So the good thing, though, is that all P&I clubs within their rules have a catch-all called the omnibus clause. So in the end of the day, every single member is free to bring an omnibus claim to their board of directors if they believe that it's warranted for cover, and the decision will be made by their own peers. But from a management perspective, the rules do not give us discretion to extend actual reimbursement for costs unless there has been an outbreak on the ship.
And in terms of, are there that many outbreaks on ships other than the cruise liners that we've seen that have been in major headlines?
We have not seen one in our membership so far, but we are a smaller club. I
Well,
don't
great.
know
Well,
about the
thanks,
other clubs.
Dorothea.
Yeah.
And also, actually, suppose the other question, any other questions, and how's the American club dealing with this itself operationally? You're in Athens, and you wouldn't normally be in Athens,
No.
I imagine. But I know you travel to you obviously have a big office in Athens, but you're out of position. So, I mean, how's the club itself operating?
So I mean, I have found this such an interesting experience, actually. We have gone totally virtual, totally digital, totally online. We've implemented a management approach through cross-functional, cross-departmental, cross-office meetings, which are scheduled every single week. I right now oversee business continuity operations from Greece for Asia, Europe, and the UK, and then I act as a conduit for the New York office, and we actually, I think, get things done a little bit faster, if you ask me, because one of the unique things about this whole crisis and everybody being home is that every single decision maker is immediately and easily accessible. So whereas we were always efficient, and things, we already had a system in place to manage how we operate. Usually decisions might take 2 or 3 days, let's say, because different people might be traveling. Like you said, I mean, I'm based in New York right now, but I travel to all of our offices, and I also travel for business development and for various purposes for the club. So at any given time, one of us could have been on a plane and things would have to be delayed. Well, now nobody's ever on a plane. We're all in our homes. And basically, if there's an issue in Asia in the morning, it's resolved by midnight that same day in my time anyway, in Greece. Yeah.
So you know where everyone is, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that is an advantage, and I think it's going to probably shift a little bit the way that we all do business. I mean, actually work more than I've ever worked before because I connect all of the time zones within which we work. So I found it a remarkable experience. I've embraced it. All of us have embraced it. One of the other things that we took the opportunity to do was there were some little elements of what we were doing from operations which were still partly paper-based. Well, we were all forced to abandon that. Every single person had to embrace, electronic version of everything that we do. And even some processes that were maybe the timeline was a little bit longer to go digital or go on some of our platforms, we just went with it, and we're now fully virtual.
Well, great. Thanks, Dorothy. I think that's really good to kind of address that issue straight away, because it'd be crazy to do a podcast right now and not talk about that issue.
Yes.
Because actually, and I should now level with the listeners, because actually I wanted to do this originally as a kind of primer and a myth buster about P&I, because those that don't work in P&I, I think will find it almost a closed off part of the world. And it's a part of the world of the insurance world that I've always found fascinating as a journalist, because it's just particularly interesting. Also, I have a particular affinity with the sea and the sort of marine industry myself anyway, personally. So I'd love to do just a quick run through with you for the benefit of our, our non-P&I, non-marine listeners, what P&I is all about. And why don't we start with a kind of, how do you explain when you're talking to an insurance person who's not a P&I person, how do you explain it to them usually, when it's sort of simply when you're talking in a bar or something?
Okay, right, because I'm always talking about this in a bar, right?
Well, as if you were.
No, just a joke. Yeah, so I actually like to talk about it in simple terms. When I started in the industry, I had no clue about P&I when I started in shipping back in the late 90s. So I find it very interesting, fascinating. I think it's a world within a world. And the way I explain it basically is, if you're used to looking at insurance in a classic, let's say, commercial structure platform, the way that P&I works, at least for the mutual side of it, which is what we are, let's talk about the structure first. So they are non-for-profit mutual insurance associations. What does that mean? That means that they're not stock companies, number one, okay? It means that they have what we call members, because it's a club, and it's the money or the premium that's paid in is what is used to manage and pay for the liabilities. Now, obviously, this has been going on since the 1800s. I think the oldest club is about 165 years old. So we've managed to build up, the capital required to manage it like this. The breadth and the scope of the cover is very large. So we cover things that start from a regular crew illness, like we talked about earlier, and it goes to oil pollution, to casualties, to groundings, to wreck removal, collisions, things like that. But what's really unique about, I think, the P&I cover on two levels is that if the mutual has a bad year, which means that the premiums that they collected were not enough to cover the claims, theoretically and within its structure, the mutual itself is entitled to ask for additional what's called calls from the membership to meet that deficit. And also on the other side of that, if there is more money in the end of the year than the claims that were incurred, there's two ways that can be approached. A decision can be made by the board to put that money, keep it in the club to increase the surplus, keep it healthy, or it can also issue a dividend to its members. So this is the unique aspect, which means that theoretically, and not just theoretically, in a realistic form, the mutual P&I clubs cannot go insolvent. And that is a concept actually that we find very hard sometimes to explain to regulators, even hard to explain to, like you said, non-P&I people. Really, it's a self-regulating mechanism that will always keep it afloat, will always ensure that it's healthy. And the other unique thing about the mutuals is that because it's owned by its own members, it's run by its members. So the rules were created to be able to adapt and evolve to meet the needs that the ship owners themselves feel should be met. And the rules are structured like that. They evolve with the times. And we've seen that time and time again. As world regimes and conventions increase, P&I cover has increased and has met it. When the world had a crisis with crews that were being abandoned, the P&I world met it. And that's because it's run by its ship owners. So the mutuals have a board of directors. They have committees that are elected by the membership. It's usually made up by members themselves, by representatives of the ship-owning companies. They usually include also some independent members because we do need to have a balanced structure and avoid conflict. And then the day-to-day operations are handled by professional managers like us, like Shipowners Claims Bureau for the American Club. And these managers usually have experts, not usually, they always have experts in the field relating to marine liability. So you will find every single type of specialty employed by a manager, or sometimes some of the clubs actually directly employ. So these are the unique features of the P&I world. I hope that I did that
You did really well
enough for the non-P&I people.
Yeah, well, actually, something I've always wondered about is, your liability insurers ultimately. But why don't you do hull? Or I mean, I know you do, when you do hull, you do it on what you call a fixed premium basis, as in more conventional insurance. Where you pay your premium and you don't get any refunds if you don't have any claims.
Yeah. Well, I think, there's probably lots of reasons for that for different companies. Let's start from the historical perspective. P&I clubs began simply because these types of liabilities could no longer be insured by your standard commercial underwriters that were doing the hull. They just refused, they just didn't want to do it. They didn't want to have that type of liability. So the P&I clubs were born out of that gap in insurance. Okay. Yes, okay. And then beyond that, a lot of us, our licensing is restricted to liabilities and doesn't include hull. And a lot, like for the American Club, a lot of the benefits that we have within our regulatory domicile in New York is based on keeping that structure. So we would have to go back and undo a lot of that in order to do hull. So the best way, or the most effective way that the clubs have found, is to do it separately. Also, don't forget, the mutuals like us, the 13 clubs that are member of the international group, the international group agreement is based on P&I. It's not just marine cover. So that is also one of the reasons why we stick to it.
You've just introduced the international group. Now that's a group of the 13 main P&I clubs around the world. Explain what that is and why that's so important.
Yes, so the international group is comprised of 13 P&I clubs. Between all of us, and the American Club is a member, between all of us, we provide cover for about 90% of the world's ocean-going tonnage. And while each club individually manages itself, within the group, there is an agreement that all claims above 10 million are reinsured through a pooling agreement and a very large reinsurance excess of loss structure, probably the largest, I think, in the world. So no matter what level of liability arises within any of the clubs, it can be met because of this very deep reinsurance structure. But it does more than that. So, I mean, its number one purpose is the claims pooling and reinsurance. But the group also does a lot more than that. So the group actually acts also as a forum for sharing information. So there are, I forget now how many subcommittees they are, but all of the clubs send representatives to act on their behalf within these subcommittees, and all the subcommittees deal with all the specialized areas of P&I, and we share information from our memberships, and that helps us actually help the ship owner better. But not only, it actually provides a service, I think, also within the greater industry. There's been a huge motivation lately to also share more and more information and produce more data that can help the industry, and that's definitely a drive right now within the IG. Beyond that, also, don't forget, the IG can also act as a voice for the ship owning industry, whether that is with other NGOs or within the regulatory forum or just within the industry. So it is really a very, I would say, remarkable organization, and is a real resource to the industry. And I think, in my opinion, probably contributes to sustainability because it actually facilitates world trade. So what this group does is it provides a ticket to trade. When somebody has a certificate of entry from any one of the 13 clubs which are a member of the IG, they can go into any port they like because it is evidence of real financial security. And the other thing, I actually want to go back to something. Talking about explaining P&I to a non-P&I person, and this goes all the way up the chain into the IG. It's not just a platform or a structure which pays claims. What the P&I clubs do is they are there from day one. They are with the ship owner, managing that claim from the very first notice to the very end. And it's not just a resource of expertise. So it's not just that the ship owner calls up a master mariner that works for the club or calls up a lawyer that works for the club and gets advice. No, we are actively involved. So we are the ones that are managing. We are the ones that are working in coordination with the member and giving the instructions. We are the ones that are using our vast experience to apply it to new types of claims, to apply it to a situation where a particular member maybe hasn't had that type of experience.
So you're so much more embedded than an insurance company would be. So it's almost like that. Once they're in the club, that they just use your facilities as if they were their own. You're their in-house team, right?
Yeah. Yes, an extension. Yes, exactly. That's it.
Great. Okay, let's do a quick run through some of these, just like quick fire stuff on P&I myth busting. Is it true that P&I clubs don't compete with each other on price? Is that?
No, it's not true.
That's not true.
It's not true.
It's one of those things that you hear around, you hear around. And so that's not true.
It's not true. And I would mention also that the IG went through a very intense review by the EU as well in order to ensure that
was
it
a kind of
complies
competition.
with Yes, exactly. The whole scrutiny was related to competition. So there are rules that we abide by, because in order to be able to pool our claims, we have to have some structure to that, and we have to have some rules. And don't forget that P&I has a long tail. So you can have something that happens in 1 year, and the actual liability might not happen, might not be incurred for a number of years later, depending on statute of limitations for that claim. It could be anywhere from 3 to 6 years. So there has to be a mechanism in place which accommodates that. So basically what happens is this: if a ship owner wants to move a ship from one club to the other, there are restrictions in terms of the pricing for the first year. But in terms of new business, all the clubs compete against each other. It's no different than any other commercial insurance provider.
So it's good. It just keeps you healthy, keeps everything healthy, and makes sure that there's no sort of no slack in the system.
Sustainability, exactly.
And is it true that all the contracts do renew on the 20th of February?
Yes, they do. So even if a ship comes in mid-year, it will be only valid up until the 20th of February, and then it will renew again on the 20th of February. That is because you can't run a mutual in any other way, because they have to be exactly same policy years in order to apply the call system.
Right. Okay. And is that because of the date at which the Baltic Sea unfroze, or
yes.
So it normally became navigable around that time.
Right.
So therefore, it's a good time to get your insurance renewed, because you're going to start using your ship.
Exactly.
Within that peer group of 13, what's distinctive about the American club? Where do you differentiate yourself and say, join our club because it's different?
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you for that. So the American Club is the only American domiciled club. So the first thing that I would say is that we definitely have special know-how with the respect to U.S. related matters, and we all know that the U.S. related matters sometimes can involve much greater liabilities than other countries. But I would say that more importantly, the American Club traditionally is geared towards the smaller to mid-size operator. In many cases, family-run businesses, though, that have been around for decades. And because of our size and that sort of niche in the market, we're a little bit like a boutique. We're also a smaller club, even in terms of the number of people that we have globally and in terms of membership. And what we strive towards and what we've achieved is that we actually know every single member by name. And it's not only just regional, it's really global. We really do know them. And our people know the people within our membership. So I think that what we have an advantage at is that we have a very personable approach. We feel the claims that our members have. We also have invested in local talent in every single city that we have an office. We hire locally. We don't send people from abroad to do that job because we believe that local talent and expertise is much better placed, and they're going to understand that membership in that country or in that region better than an implant from the United States. So we pride ourselves on very personable approach and handling from a claims perspective, and I think that's our strength. I think we're good at that. If you look at it, we have about a year on year, we tend to have about a 95, maybe 98% in some cases retention. So that says it all, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay. Well, one thing that P&I clubs seem to do regularly is that they get into what you describe as fixed premium business, as in for-profit conventional insurance business. We've seen this with syndicates at Lloyd's, but of course you've got your own Hellenic Hull operations and other fixed premium operations. What is it that draws P&I clubs into the conventional insurance world?
Okay, so just to clarify one thing in terms of the American Club has what's called Eagle Ocean Marine as a fixed premium, and then the American Hellenic is for Hull. So in terms of the fixed premium business on P&I think the biggest motivator is that simply there is a sector of the market, right, that doesn't need billions of dollars of cover. They are small ships that do intercoastal trading, sometimes domestic trading, sometimes just regional trading, and so they're looking for lower covers, and they couldn't be serviced in the past by the mutuals because they didn't match. So that was what we found at the American Club, is that why should we not provide that service? Because we look at insurance cover as a service. We don't really look at it simply, like I said earlier, as a reimbursement of claims. So we said, why shouldn't we provide that service? So what we did was we filled that demand and that gap in the market, and I think that has been the trend within the clubs, because also it keeps it within our family as opposed to it going to some regular outside commercial provider. And also the advantage to this is that there are some operators that have smaller tonnage and larger tonnage, and that gives them an option to stay within the mutual club's family as well. Yeah,
that's really, that makes sense. And I suppose you're using your infrastructure in a more efficient way. If you've got all those people, you've got all your teams,
right?
You might as well. You've got people in in all major ports around the world, and you might as well use them. Right. What about mutuality? Mutuality, is it absolutely at the core of P&I? Do you think clubs might ever demutualize? It's happened in the world, in the the non-marine world. We've had big mutuals demutualize, particularly in the UK. You've had Norwich Union, for example, and now to eventually become part of Aviva. Could that ever happen in your world?
Well, I'm just going to rely on history. I'm just going to say that I think that it's the tried and tested platform. I think that the mutual system provides the most cost-effective way to approach what is probably some of the largest liabilities on the planet. I don't see that happening. That's just my opinion, I think you'd have to get, obviously not, I don't, it's not that I don't think, you on board to do something like that. I don't see them seeing an advantage in it. I think it works, and I think that, if something works, doesn't need to
Just
be
to cover,
fixed.
did you say you'd have to get the members on board to want
You'd
to
have
do
to
that?
get you'd have to get
Yeah.
you'd have to get the board members to agree that they're going to demutualize, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Because it would have to, presumably, it would have to be some way of accessing finance that you
That
can't
would
get
be
otherwise.
it. Right.
Like, is it
But
debt? It's presumably you can't raise debt, and obviously you can't raise equity
yes.
because you don't have equity.
Yes, but that's also why I think it won't happen, because they can always raise through additional calls if necessary. And when years are good, the premiums are low, and when there's a recession, the premiums are low, and then when they're needed, they rise. So it's a balance, and it works.
And I presume some of your members, of course, are stock companies themselves, so they can finance if you have a particularly bad year and you have a very high margin call, then presumably then they can go and refinance. They've still got their own financing to be able to finance those things.
I guess. Yes, I guess they can. Yeah.
Consolidation, that's something that's often been on the cards. Out of the 13, particularly your 13 peer group members of the international group, the IG, as you've been saying. Occasionally potential mergers have been slated, but do you think that's something that's going to be inevitable at some point?
I actually don't think it's inevitable. I think that if we look at the instances in recent history, we saw how, even though there was a suggestion and proposals, that they didn't actually get passed by their respective boards. I don't think that there is any inherent advantage for an owner to allow two clubs to merge. Any club at any time can decide to go to a different club if they believe that the club that they're in doesn't meet their needs or doesn't match who they are. And really, that's a lot of part of the decision. I think that there is no benefit. I mean, I keep trying to think about this. I've had this discussion before. What is the real benefit to the membership to merge two clubs? It would probably dilute their interest or their influence or their relationship. Actually, it would, you'd have to get, again, two boards to get on board with that. And I think that possibly there would be an advantage or a benefit to managers if there's two independent managers running the two clubs, but I don't see any real benefit for the membership. I mean, like I said, we can't forget that these P&I clubs are creatures of the ship owners. So if we look at history again, I don't see that anything's changed that would shift that trend.
What about the potential? You're effectively in a sort of an agency that's running the mutual on behalf of its members.
Yeah.
How do you keep your interests fully aligned with the membership?
Well, actually, I think that having an independent manager keeps balance. There's more transparency. I think that it is I find it very effective. Our interests are always aligned with the members because we serve their needs, we serve their purpose. Our job is to provide them with the information that they need to make the decisions. So I think that there's more independence, there's less conflict, and things are much better run that way. So I do think that we're fully aligned, because
and I'm presuming, of course, these are international business people, and they know exactly how to hold your feet to the fire in terms of expenses and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I mean, everything gets approved ultimately by the board, so it's very transparent. Everything is disclosed.
Great. Okay. One last thing, one last sort of P&I basics question before we move on to bigger stuff that's actually happening in the P&I sector. One of the things I've always noticed about P&I clubs when I go to your results presentations is that compared to a standard insurance, insurance group, a fixed premium for-profit insurance group, you tend to be able to take a little bit more risk, or you tend to have an appetite to take a little bit more risk on the asset side of the balance sheet than a fixed premium insurer. So, you tend to have an allocations, perhaps a slightly higher allocation to equities and other things. Why is that? Or how does that come about?
Well, don't forget that all the clubs also have finance committees, and they have advisors related to the allocation of the portfolios that we have. I think that each club has its own individual strategy. The American club strategy has worked in that respect. Of course, we're also balanced by regulatory requirements.
Because I
So,
mean, you're still
yeah,
covered by Solvency II,
yeah,
another
not
solvency
only that, yeah,
regime. Yeah.
Solvency II for the European, and then also New York State, the Department of Financial Services runs the American club. So we work within these
So you
parameters.
still have to take the take the capital loadings if you have a higher
Yeah,
risk
yeah,
asset balance sheet, asset side. You still have to take the capital loadings that come with that, right? So
yes. So I mean, yeah, I think that's just a product of that's just a product of each individual club's investment strategy based on advice that they're taking from experts. I think that is the way to explain that.
yeah, and then I suppose, and it's all authorized by the membership anyway, so because it's their
Right.
money,
That's
right?
exactly. And well, I mean, we spend hours listening to experts at the American Club in order to make sure that we have a sound investment strategy. I mean, if you look back even in 2008 when we had the big crisis and a lot of clubs lost a lot of money, the American Club in particular, I think we had 8%, I think, but then because we maintained the advice that we had from the experts, from asset management experts, we kept the same strategy. We did not panic, and it rebounded the very next year. The very within months of the next year, with a return I think of 12%, if I remember correctly. So it works.
That's great. Right, talking more operationally about things, as a journalist covering the insurance industry, obviously the biggest stories in P&I have been obviously the Costa Concordia grounding, and before that there was the MV Rena, which was in New Zealand, and now we've had
Right.
a recent loss of the Golden Ray, and all of the core of all of those is a different kind of attitude that's evolved over time towards wreck removal. Whereas, I grew up in the 1970s in the UK, and I remember there was the Torrey Canyon and the Amoco Cadiz oil spills, and this is in the southwest of England. I think the Torrey Canyon was used by the RAF as target practice, and
Wow.
and these days that just would not happen. You'd have a painstaking wreck removal process. So is that really one of the? I mean, looking from the outside, I see that
Yeah.
is that one of the most problematic parts of P&I now, that you're really having to price into your premiums. The fact that if you run aground anywhere these days, your local authority is going to be incredibly tough on you in terms of putting the seabed exactly the way it was before and making sure nothing's lying around that shouldn't be there.
It's problematic from a handling perspective. Why? Because you hit it right on the nose. So when you have a wreck removal, you're dealing with a local authority. Local authorities don't have the expertise or the experience to understand perhaps the best method that could be used to handle the situation. So there is a lot of room for government interference in terms of making a decision for the most effective way to approach a wreck removal. They don't always listen to what the P&I clubs are recommending. There's also a lot of room for local interests perhaps taking advantage of a situation. So it is definitely problematic from that perspective. I don't think it's problematic from a pricing perspective because we've just had so much experience in dealing with it. The pool structure responds to it so effectively. I mean, look at the Costa Concordia. I think it hit 1.5 billion, and it didn't cause any ripples. It didn't cause any issue for us.
Yeah, I
There,
mean, there was a
obviously it
couple
was
of
taken.
tough
Yeah,
renewals, right?
exactly,
But
exactly. But taking into the whole history into account, it was something that could be expected. It was something that it was able to absorb, and I just found that wonderful. Really, I think it just proves that the P&I system is foolproof. So I don't think it's problematic from that perspective, but it definitely is problematic in terms of our general claims handling management because of the great uh, gap or the great window that exists for government interference, really. I think that's the biggest problem that's related to wreck removal.
So there, do you think that you're hopeful of any kind of newer international conventions on wreck removal coming through all the the International Maritime Organization and other things? That are you
I don't
lobbying for
see
that
that
kind of stuff?
I don't see that high on the priority of the international industry. I don't see it high. We try and deal with it, simply from a management perspective on internal guidance and also working with the stakeholders that would manage a wreck removal, and that includes also working in tandem with the salvage operators to make sure that we're at least all on the same page. And I think that's important, and I think we've done a good job of that.
Well, I mean, I suppose the other main peril that I would always you'd associate with marine liability is pollution. So, I mean, how's the industry doing? What's the kind of report card on the shipping business these days in terms of containing and controlling pollution vis-a-vis the past?
Well, I think that if you look at just the industry itself, I think we've come a long way. I think that just looking at the changes, even in regulation of tankers, that's made a big difference. Obviously, we have now recent regulation related to emissions. The IG does its best on the international platforms to be a voice and to show that actually the P&I industry and the ship owners care about the environment. We do care about the environment. We rely on the seas. We are, as an industry, better equipped at containing and controlling pollution. That again goes back to cooperation with salvors and experts related to managing pollution and casualties. So yeah, I definitely think that we've come a long way.
And I mean, what's your gut feeling? Because we've had such a long time since we've had a major international oil spill event. Given what's happened in the intervening time, one presumes that public or authorities' tolerance for such an event would be really, really low, much lower than it ever has been. Do you think that it's likely to be a much bigger financial event if it does happen than it would have been in the past?
Would it be a larger financial? I
I
think
mean, would
that
it be a total loss to your reinsurance program?
I
And then
don't think it'll
you'd
be
spinning back over?
I don't think it's going to be. No, I don't think that we would have. I don't think that we would have a situation like that. And I think that in any event, the reinsurance structure is built to be able to manage it. I think in any event, don't forget that oil pollution, for example, is limited to 1 billion. So that definitely it creates a stop loss. So I think the whole system is created to be able to adapt to the increasing liabilities. I think it's well equipped to manage whatever comes our way right now.
Right. Okay. And you mentioned about emissions, and that's down to things like sulfur in diesel. How are those underlying risks evolving? What are those new rules that are coming in, and how are you sort of reacting to them?
Yeah, so I think it was probably the number one thing spoken about last year,
Yeah.
IMO 2020, and the implementation of the sulfur cap as of January 1st. And I think recently, I think it was a March 15th deadline, I don't remember what it was, to actually not have any non-compliant fuel on board, of course, unless you've installed scrubbers. There's so much debate about this. The P&I clubs have also spent a lot of time discussing it with their membership. I think that it's still early to tell about the impact. The experts that I have spoken to have said that it's going to take at least 6 months to a year to see the full impact on the potential liabilities. And one of the reasons is that the way it's been explained to me is that the sulfur element within the fuel also acts as a cushion or a lubricant. And so now they've had to replace that with other additives, chemical additives, to manage that process. And really long term, we don't know the effect on the engines. There's a lot of talk about potential engine problems long term, but it would take some time, because basically what it does is it potentially affects the wear and tear. So I
So that's a
think
hull and
that it's still,
machinery kind of problem.
but not only, it's not only though, because if a ship is loaded with cargo and it has an engine breakdown,
Yeah, okay.
then that impacts on P&I. So we are very concerned about that. But I think that the industry, even though there was a lot of talk, there was a lot of pushback, I think that they prepared well. I think we're still gonna still there's some issues over the types of scrubbers that were implemented. I think there's probably a sector of the ship management.
So just to clarify, scrubbers
Yeah,
are kind of the equivalent of a
equipment.
catalytic
Yeah.
converter in your car's exhaust. That the kind of thing that would clean up some of the emissions before they're emitted out into the air.
Right, exactly. And then there was some debate over different types of scrubbers, which are whether they're emitted right and back into the ocean or whether they're held on board. And then other debates arise then, okay, are there going to be sufficient places to dispose, and is it okay to put it in the ocean? So these are some of the debates that have developed. And there's also the impact in terms of the ability to trade, because some ports are banning open loop scrubbers. So there's still a lot more to see on this front for sure.
But generally, there's a statutory position now that's come in that says you can't have emissions over a certain amount,
Yes.
or you can't
Or
carry
you
a
get
certain type of
fined.
fuel.
Yes. Yes.
So
Or you will get
really,
fined.
and there you're where you would have to come in would be fines and things where things are non-compliant.
Yes, and it will be treated like any other liability related to fines. So there's this is the way that we have to approach it. So remember that the rules deal with accidental discharge or emission. So each case would have to be evaluated on its specific facts in terms of whether it's covered. So if somebody gets fined because they've taken no measures to comply, that's different than, let's say, an accident related to equipment on the ship, or
So if the
something to
scrubber
do with the
doesn't
crew.
work,
Yeah,
or if you take on the
right.
wrong type of fuel by accident.
Yes. So the clubs though would obviously look as best, like we always do, because we're an owner's mutual. We're always going to look at things looking at it to the benefit of the owner. We're going to give them the benefit of the doubt to the greatest extent that we can.
What about something that's really been out there a lot recently is cyber risk. How exposed are you to cyber liabilities coming into things? Because certainly we've seen spoofing of the kind of GPS, the equivalent of GPS locations that you have on board large ocean-going ships, and all sorts of interesting things that I've seen. Now that there's more technology on board ship these days, how kind of exposed to you are that to those kind of liabilities, and how worried are you about them?
Right. Well, so the rules don't have any exclusions for cyber risks, but we always have to look at the way we approach P&I, and we have to look at the type of liability that ensues from some kind of a casualty or a cause. So the P&I clubs would be exposed to, let's say you have, like you said, a spoofing. Let's say somebody takes over a ship through a cyber attack. Now, if it's related to a war or terrorism act, so if the person that's doing the cyber attack and taking over the ship and possibly causing some kind of an accident, its purpose was related to an act of war or terrorism, then that is something that is excluded. That would go to the war underwriters. But let's say it's just not related to that. It's just somebody that is just interfering for the sake of interfering, and we know that there are people like that out there. One of the things we have to keep in mind is that if that happens, sometimes we wouldn't even know, really. So it would be approached as any other P&I liability. It might even be, we might even think that it was simply a malfunction of equipment. We might not know that it was a cyber attack. But even if we do know it's a cyber attack, as long as there was no act by the owner that can create let's say a nexus of allowing something like that to happen, then it would be approached in the normal fashion. So like, for example, again, you have to look at every single detail in the scenario. If you have a situation where you have policies in place to protect the ship against cyber attacks, you don't let people use unauthorized USBs, you have a procedure in place to try and prevent these things, and despite everything, somebody hacked into you. like I said, you probably won't know. But even if you do know, and it causes a collision or an accident, or it hits a dock or something like that, the P&I will respond to that. That doesn't change anything for us. But if you have let's say a ransomware situation, because the P&I clubs don't cover standard economic loss, if you have like a situation where, let's say, the shore side of ship operators business is attacked by malware, and then it's held ransom, their documents and things like that are held for ransom, well, that's not an actual P&I risk, so that's not something we would cover. So that's a separate issue.
Dorothea, I think we're coming to the end of our allotted time. I just want to thank you very much for your time. I just want to give you the opportunity to add anything that any other business that we should have discussed that we haven't discussed yet that you'd like to, or any other messages you'd like to send.
The only thing I really want to get across is that the P&I world really is, I know I said this, but it really is unique. It really does facilitate trade. It really creates a platform of security for every single government, every single claimant, every single authority, every single harbor master in the world. Because it's such an extensive level of cover, and it's been tested so many times that when you see that paper, that certificate of entry from a ship that shows that they're entered with a club that's within the international group, you just know that you're going to have somebody that's well placed to manage your situation. And I'm just really, really proud to be a part of that.
Well,
honestly,
well,
that's it.
Thanks for giving us a basic kind of navigation of the P&I world, and thank you so much, and good luck with everything. I know you're in lockdown in Athens. I hope that you're able to sort of start traveling the world again soon. But until then, stay safe and look after yourself. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Mark. Pleasure to be here. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Voice of Insurance is produced by me, Mark Gagan. Music was written by Anna Gagan and produced by Carlos Gagan. Check out more podcasts and written comment pieces at www.thevoiceofinsurance.com.